Okay, so you want to own a medieval tannery. A yard by the river, rows of pits in the ground, stacks of hides coming in from the butchers, and finished leather going out the gate to every shoemaker, saddler, and glover in town. And here's why the idea is genuinely tempting. Look at what walks past you on any market day in any medieval town. Every shoe on every foot is leather. Every belt, every saddle, every harness, every pair of gloves. The buckets at the well are leather. The bellows at the forge are leather. The hinges on the poor man's door, the binding on the rich man's book, the jerkin on the soldier, and the apron on the smith. This is the plastic of the Middle Ages. It is in everything, and everyone needs it, forever, because it wears out. And now, the part that makes it look like free money. The raw material is nearly worthless. A hide is a byproduct. The butcher slaughtered that bullock for the meat. The skin is what's left over, and the butcher has no use for it. So you are buying the leftovers of somebody else's business, cheap, and turning them into the one material the entire economy runs on. Buy garbage. Sell necessity. You look at that spread and you think, this is the best margin in town. Here's the problem. Between the garbage and the necessity sits a year, not a year of work, a year of waiting, while your money lies at the bottom of a pit of brown water, and you are not allowed to hurry it. A tannery is not really a leather business. It is a warehouse for buried capital that happens to smell like death. And the moment you understand that, everything strange about this trade starts making sense. Why the most necessary craftsman in Europe was pushed outside the city walls. Why his neighbors wouldn't marry into his family. And why, in the end, the English Parliament passed a law making it illegal for the man who made the leather to ever cut it. So how does the person making the most essential material in the medieval world end up as its most regulated and least welcome businessman? The answer starts with what this trade actually sells. And it isn't leather. First, the money, quickly, so the numbers in this video mean something. English money runs 12 pence to the shilling and 20 shillings to the pound. A master mason in the 14th century earns about 4 pence a day. A cow costs 6 to 9 shillings. A one-room cottage costs about £2 to build. So when a number in pounds comes up, translate it into months of a skilled man's wages, because that's what it was. Now, there isn't one leather trade. There are several, and in England they aren't just different crafts. They are different legal territories, and the borders between them are patrolled. At the heavy end sits the tanner. He takes the thick hides of cattle, soaks them in pits with oak bark, and produces the hard, tough, reddish leather that becomes shoe soles, saddles, and harness. This is the business we're buying today. Beside him works the widow warrior, who handles almost everything the tanner doesn't. Sheepskins, goatskins, deerskins, treated not with bark, but with alum, egg yolks, oil, and flour, producing soft white leather for gloves and fine work. And in 1509, English law drew the border in ink. Tanners were forbidden to tan sheepskin at all. That was the widow warrior's territory now, by statute. Downstream of both sits the currier, a separate trade whose entire job is taking the tanner's stiff output and dressing it with tallow and oil until it is flexible enough to use. And beyond him, the cordwainers and saddlers and glovers who cut it into goods. Notice what that structure means before we spend a penny. You are not buying a position in the leather industry. You are buying one slot in a legally enforced assembly line, and the walls of that slot are not yours to move. Keep that in mind, because at the end of this video, the walls close in. Right. Let's build the yard. The first cost of a tannery is one that never appears in your ledger, because it's paid in geography. You don't choose where a tannery goes. The town chooses for you. Across medieval Europe, city ordinances pushed tanneries to specific districts, and the pattern is the same everywhere. Downstream of the drinking water, downwind of the houses, and, wherever possible, outside the walls entirely. In York, you can practically map the medieval wind direction, by where the tanners, dyers, and soap boilers were allowed to stand. Town councils that tolerated open sewers in the street looked at the tanning trade and decided it needed to be somewhere else. That decision has a price. Outside the walls means outside the protection of the walls. It means land at the edge, further from your customers, further from the butchers who supply you. Every regulation about where you may stand is also a tax on every cart journey you will ever make. But you need the river more than you need the town, so down to the river you go, because water is the one input this business drinks without ever stopping. Fresh hides soak in it. Lime dissolves in it. Every washing between every stage uses it, and everything you wash out of a hide, the blood, the lime, the hair, the dung liquor, goes back into the same river, which is precisely why the ordinance put you downstream, and why the men who live below you on that river will hate you politely for the rest of your working life. There are records across medieval Europe of exactly this fight. Fishermen, brewers, and households downstream petitioning councils about what the tanners were putting in the water. You are in a permanent, low-grade legal war with your own neighbors over a resource you both need, and only one of you poisons. And then you start digging. A working tannery is not a building. It's a field of holes, and holes are more expensive than they sound. Each pit has to be dug below the frost, lined with timber so the walls don't slump into the liquor, and made tight enough to hold its solution for a year without draining into the soil. A pit that leaks doesn't announce itself. It just quietly weakens its liquor over months, and you find out when the hides come up half-tanned. A year later, with no way to prove which season the fault crept in. The pits are the machine, and the machine is buried, invisible, and impossible to inspect while it's running. Count what you need. Soaking pits for fresh hides. Lime pits, several of them, at different strengths, because hides move through weaker lime into stronger. Mastering pits for the step we will get to in a moment. And then the tan pits themselves. And here is the first structural surprise of this business. You don't need a few tan pits. You need dozens. Hold that thought, because the reason why is the entire economics of the trade, and it deserves its own chapter. Around the pits you build the rest. A beam house where hides are scraped. Drying lofts with open slatted walls, because finished leather must dry slowly in moving air. And the regulations, as we'll see, cared very much about how it dried. Storage for bark, which has to be kept bone dry, or it's worthless. And access to a bark mill, because tanning bark works far better ground to powder, and grinding tons of bark by hand is not a business. Now the supply chain. And this is where the medieval tannery becomes genuinely unlike any other respectable trade, because your inputs come from two places, the forest and the gutter. Start with the hides themselves, because there's a trap hiding inside that cheap raw material, and it's the kind of trap you only see once you're standing in it. A hide is a byproduct, and that's why it's cheap, but it's also why the supply of hides obeys nobody, including you. Nobody in England kills a bullock for its skin. Cattle are slaughtered for meat, and the hide simply comes along with the meal, which means the number of hides arriving at your gate this month has nothing to do with what you're willing to pay for them. It has to do with how much beef the town wanted to eat. Think about what that does to you in a shortage. In a normal trade, when your raw material runs short, you offer more money, and more of it appears. Not here. Offer the butchers double for hides, and they will happily take your money. But not one additional bullock will die because of it. The meat market sets the slaughter sets the hides, and you are downstream of both, holding a purse that can move the price but cannot move the supply. And the trap has a second jaw. When cattle disease sweeps a county, dead and dying animals flood the market with cheap hides. A glut, a gift, the best buying season of your life. Except every one of those carcasses was also next year's slaughter, and the year after's. The same murrain that fills your pits today is hollowing out your supply for the next 5 years. The glut and the famine are the same event, arriving in 2 installments. So your raw material is cheap, yes. It is also completely beyond your influence, in both directions. forever. That's the real price of buying leftovers. You inherit the volatility of someone else's dinner table. Then, from the forest, oak bark, and in staggering quantities. Bark is your single biggest consumable, the fuel of the entire operation, and you cannot grow it yourself on any useful timescale. Bark comes off oak trees when they're felled or coppiced, which means your fuel supply is a byproduct of somebody else's industry, the timber trade, and it moves with their decisions, not yours. When felling is heavy, bark is cheap. When felling is light, every tanner in the county is bidding against you for the same stripped trees. You have no control over this. None. From the gutter, everything else. Lime? Fair enough. That's respectable. Burned from limestone. But also urine, collected. Also dog dung, gathered from the streets. And pigeon droppings from the lofts. Because both are essential process chemistry, and we're about to see why. There were people whose actual occupation was collecting dog dung from city streets to sell to tanners. That is a real supply contract in your ledger. Your business has a line item for the waste of the town's animals, and you cannot run without it. So far, so good. Now let's follow one hide through the yard, because the process is the business plan, and the business plan is buried in it. A raw hide arrives from the butcher, still carrying blood, dung, hair, and often the horns and hooves, because the butcher couldn't be bothered removing what he couldn't sell. First it soaks in the river or a pit for days, softening, washing clean. Then into the lime pits, for weeks. The lime swells the hide and loosens the hair at the root. Then the beam house, and this is the brutal part. The hide goes over a curved wooden beam, and a man works it with knives. A blunt one pushing off the loosened hair, a sharp double-edged one shaving the flesh and fat from the other side. This is heavy, skilled, dangerous to the product work. One slip cuts a hole, and a whole hide drops in value instantly after weeks of processing already spent on it. Then the step that made the whole trade a public scandal. The lime has to come out, and the fibers have to soften, and the medieval method was baiting, soaking the hides in a warm solution of dog dung or pigeon droppings, whose enzymes break down exactly the right proteins. The alternative was a fermented mash of barley or rye in stale beer or urine. This stage could run up to 3 months. 3 months of hides lying in warm dung water. This is what the neighbors smelled. This is why you're outside the walls. And then, finally, tanning. The hides go into pits, layered with ground oak bark, in liquor that starts weak and gets stronger, pit by pit. Because if the outside of a hide tans too fast, it seals shut, and the middle never converts. And there they lie, and lie. For heavy cattle hides, tanned properly with oak bark, the process took around 12 months. A year, sometimes more. That was not the medieval way of being slow. That is what the chemistry takes. And the craft still exists today, and it still takes 12 months with everything we now know. Now, here's where the whole picture flips, because you're probably still thinking of that year as a production detail. It isn't. It's the entire business. Do the arithmetic with me. Say you want to sell finished leather steadily, a batch every week, because your customers, the couriers and cordwainers, need supply every week. Not one glorious delivery every October. If every batch spends a year underground, then to lift one batch out this week, you must have put one batch in 52 weeks ago, and 51 weeks ago, and 50 weeks ago. To sell continuously, you need a full pipeline, which means at any given moment, an entire year's worth of hides, bark, lime, and labor is lying in your pits, paid for and unsellable. That's why you dug dozens of pits. Every pit is a shelf in a warehouse, and the goods on the shelf are money. Money you spent months ago, sleeping under brown water, slowly, invisibly, becoming leather. Here's a way to feel what that actually means. Imagine a man who takes his savings, walks into his garden every Monday morning, and buries a purse of silver in a fresh hole. Every Monday, without fail, a purse goes into the ground. And the rule is that no purse may be dug up until it has lain there for a full year, at which point, if all went well, it comes up somewhat heavier than it went in. For the first year, this man is simply a person who buries money. His neighbors watch his savings disappear into the earth, week after week, and nothing comes back out. Only in the second year does the garden begin to pay. 1 purse a week, each one planted 12 months before. And from then on, his income looks steady and reliable. And everyone forgets that the whole arrangement balances on a single condition. The purses have to keep going in, every Monday, no matter what. Because a Monday skipped is not a small saving today. It's a hole in his income a year from now, at a date he can already circle on the calendar. That man is a tanner. The garden is the tan yard. And the reason his hands shake in a bad season is that he can see the empty Mondays coming, 12 months out, and there is nothing he can do about them when they arrive. Which means the day you open a tannery, you sign up for something brutal. A full year of buying hides, buying bark, paying labor, with nothing whatsoever to sell. The gym owner waits 12 months to reach break-even. You wait 12 months to reach revenue. Your entire first year is outflow, by the laws of chemistry, and no amount of talent, effort, or capital can shorten it. So look again at what this business actually sells. The hide cost almost nothing. The bark is a byproduct of the timber trade. The dung came from the street. Nearly everything you add to that worthless hide is time. A year of it. The margin between a raw skin and a sealed side of leather is, more than anything else, rent charged on patience. The tanner's real product was never leather. It was the year. And the moment you see that, you can see exactly where every fraud in this industry is going to happen. Because if the product is time, then every possible cheat is a way of stealing time. Here's the uncomfortable mechanism at the center of the trade. Properly tanned leather and rushed leather look the same. A hide pulled out after 6 months instead of 12, or forced through hot, strong liquors to speed the process, comes out looking like leather. It cuts like leather. It sells like leather. And then, 2 winters later, it cracks on a stranger's feet in the rain, or a stirrup strap parts on a road somewhere. And the man who bought it has no way of connecting that failure back to a pit that was emptied early, years ago, by someone he never met. Economists have a name for goods like this. The customer cannot judge the quality at the point of sale, or possibly ever. And a market for a product like that has a well-known disease. Honest producers carry a full year of capital cost. Cheats carry 6 months. The cheat undersells the honest man with an identical-looking product, and the buyer cannot tell the difference until long after the money has moved. Left alone, the bad leather drives out the good, because the bad leather is cheaper to make and indistinguishable on the day it's sold. Medieval England did not leave it alone. This is why the leather trade became one of the most heavily inspected industries in the kingdom. Picture the scene at a market like Leadenhall in London, which in 1532 was declared the official leather market for the whole city. 2 appointed men, chosen for being honest and skillful in the trade, moving along the stalls with a seal in hand. Every side of leather examined, bent, felt, cut into if they doubted it. The good sides get the seal struck into them, and only then may money change hands. A side without a seal isn't just unsold, it's contraband, and the searchers can seize it where it lies. And the men doing the searching were drawn from the upper ranks of the leather guilds themselves. Couriers judging tanners, tanners judging couriers, each trade policing the stage before its own, because each trade was the only one that could actually tell. The customer couldn't, the mayor couldn't. Only another man who had spent his life at the pits knew what a rushed hide felt like under the thumb. The whole system worked like this. No leather sold until searched and sealed. Unsealed leather confiscated on sight, and all sales confined to open fairs and markets, in public, in the accustomed places, precisely so that leather could not quietly change hands in a back room where no seal had ever touched it. Sit with what that system is admitting. The entire apparatus, the officials, the seals, the confiscations, the mandatory public markets, exists because everyone involved understood that the customer was helpless. If buyers could judge leather by looking at it, none of this machinery would need to exist. The inspection state is a confession about the product. And then read what the statutes actually regulated, because this is the detail that gives the whole game away. The laws did not just say make good leather. They legislated the clock. Leather was not to be over-limed. Leather was not to go into the tan vats until the lime had been thoroughly soaked out of it. The courier was forbidden to work any hide that was not thoroughly dry. Line after line, the law is not describing quality. It is prescribing durations, because the lawmakers knew exactly what we now know. In this business, every shortcut is a time shortcut. So Parliament did the only thing it could do. It made the waiting itself a legal requirement. There are not many industries in history where the state wrote patience into statute. This is one of them. Now, the social bill, because it's part of the price of admission, and nobody puts it in the prospectus. You spend your days handling carcass leftovers, lime, urine, and dung. Your yard produces a smell that town councils treated as a public order problem, with ordinances restricting your working hours and requiring your pits covered with boards. Your trade is prosperous, essential, and untouchable in both senses. In many towns, tanners formed their own tight districts, their own guilds, married within the trade, because respectable families would not always marry into a tanner's house, whatever his ledger said. Some tanners grew rich enough to sit on town councils, and some did, but the man himself carried the yard with him. The smell was in the trade, and the trade was in the family for generations. The town needed you absolutely. The town also built its walls with you on the outside of them. Both of those things were policy, and neither was an accident. And then, in 1563, the walls moved inward. The English Parliament passed the Great Leather Act, gathering a century of piecemeal regulation into one system. And what that system did, in plain terms, was freeze the entire industry into its slots, permanently, by law. Raw hides could be sold only to tanners. Tanned leather could be sold only to leather workers. Every sale in open market, every hide searched and sealed and registered. And then the clause that matters for the business you were dreaming about at the start of this video. The trades were sealed off from each other. A tanner was forbidden to work as a courier or a cordwainer. A courier was forbidden to tan. Later acts closed the last gap and forbade tanners to be butchers and butchers to be tanners. Think about what that means from inside your tannery. You produce the leather. You carry the year of buried capital, the bark risk, the spoilage risk, the stench, and the banishment, and the margin from finishing your own product, currying it, cutting it, turning a plain side of leather into shoes worth many times the raw material. That margin is illegal for you to touch. Forever, by Act of Parliament. Why would the state do that? Because the inspection system only works if every stage of the chain is separately visible. A tanner who curries and cuts his own leather can bury rushed tanning inside a finished boot where no searcher's eye will ever reach it. Keep the trades apart. Force every hide across a public market between each stage, and the product must pass under inspection at every joint of the chain. The law is perfectly rational. It just happens to permanently cap your business at one slot of the value chain and hand the downstream margin to men who never dug a pit in their lives. The tanner takes the year. The cordwainer takes the markup. Nobody wrote that sentence into the act. They didn't have to. So let's do the honest arithmetic and see what's left. Your engine is simple. Hides out per week, times the spread between what a raw hide and its bark and labor cost you a year ago, and what a sealed side of leather fetches in the open market today. Against that spread you carry the labor of the beam house, the lime, the dung contracts, the pit repairs, and above everything, the bark, whose price is set by how much timber other men decided to fell. But the number that actually rules your life is not on that list. It's the discovery lag. Every mistake in a tannery is invisible for a year. Overlime a batch in March, and you find out the following spring when the leather comes up weak. Let one pit's liquor go wrong through a hot August, and a year of one pit's capital comes up spoiled, all at once, 12 months after the error was made, far too late to correct anything. In most businesses, a bad month costs you a bad month. In this one, a bad afternoon can cost you a pit, and a pit is a year, and you will not know which afternoon it was until the year is gone. Now run the 2 years, because the gap between them is the whole risk of the trade. The good year, the town's butchers are busy, a wedding season and a good harvest have people eating beef, and hides come to your gate steady and cheap. A landowner 2 valleys overfells a wood for ship timber, and stripped oak bark floods the market at exactly the moment your store runs low. The pits turn on schedule, week after week, each Monday's burial coming up on its appointed Monday a year later, sound and full weight. The searcher bends your leather, grunts, and strikes his seal, side after side. And at the autumn fair, the couriers take everything you can lift out of the ground, because shoe leather is always, always short. You even sell your waste. The hair scraped in the beam house goes to the plasterers, who mix it into mortar. The scraps and trimmings boil down into glue. The spent bark from exhausted pits dries into fuel. Nothing in this yard is thrown away, because a business built on other men's leftovers learns very quickly that everything is worth something to somebody. A tannery in a year like this is a quietly excellent business, ugly, banished, and profitable, converting the town's waste into the town's necessities and clipping a margin at every turn. The bad year. It starts with the bark. Felling was light, the price doubles, and you're bidding against every tanner on the river for the same stripped oaks. You economize a little on the strength of the liquors, and note that thought, because it's exactly the temptation the statutes were written for. Then a wet spring floods the yard and 2 pits foul. You won't know what that cost you until next year, but you already know it cost you something. Then, in the autumn, the searcher pauses at your stall. He bends aside twice, cuts into the edge, and shakes his head. Not sealed. And here's what that verdict actually destroys. Not one hide. That hide went into the ground 14 months ago, with all its bark, and all its lime, and all its labor. And every penny of that is now standing in front of you, as condemned goods you cannot legally sell. Worse, the searcher's memory is long, and his seal is discretionary. And next market day, he will bend your leather a little harder. In a trade where the product cannot speak for itself, your reputation with 2 appointed men is a business asset worth more than your pits, and it just took a wound. And then the real blow, the one this trade is uniquely exposed to. The forecast breaks, because remember what you're doing every single week. You are buying hides and bark today to sell leather 14 months from now. Every purchase is a bet on a world more than a year away, in an economy where a bad harvest can empty the market of customers, and a visitation of plague can empty it of people. The pipeline that made your revenue smooth also made your commitments unbreakable. When demand collapses, a shoemaker simply stops buying. You cannot stop. Your next year of stock is already underground, paid for at last year's prices, becoming leather for customers who may not be there when it surfaces. The gap between those 2 years, on the same yard, with the same pits, can be the difference between a tanner who buys his son an apprenticeship and a tanner who forfeits his lease, and almost none of it turned on how good he was at tanning. So, does owning a medieval tannery work? It works if you can do the one thing the whole trade actually demands, which is not chemistry, and not craft, and not a strong stomach, though you'll need all 3. It's the ability to bury a year of your wealth in the ground on a 14-month forecast, in a world that could not reliably forecast 14 days, and then stand there every day, not digging it up early. Everyone in this story understood that, in the end. The cheats understood it, which is why every fraud in the trade was a way of stealing months. Parliament understood it, which is why the statutes read like a schedule instead of a standard. And the towns understood it best of all. They pushed the tanner downstream, past the walls, downwind, as far as the ordinances could send him. And then, every week of every year, for 500 years, they walked out there to buy from him. Because everything the town stood in, rode on, and carried was lying in his yard, under the brown water, sleeping. The smell was never the real price of this business. The waiting was. Production notes. Visual keyword density, strong. Working heritage tanneries survive and film well. Tan pits with hides layered in bark, the beam house and two-handed knives, lime pits, drying lofts with slatted walls, oak bark being stripped and ground, medieval shoes and saddles in museums, city walls and river gates at York, market squares, a searcher's seal in leather, passes the B-roll availability test. Numbers as words throughout for TTS. 0 M dashes, 0 brackets, 0 timestamps, 0 colons in narration. Verified. Hinge phrases placed at. Here's the problem. Hook. So far so good. Now let's follow one hide. Tilde 34%. Now, here's where the whole picture flips. Tilde 46%. Here's the uncomfortable mechanism. Tilde 57%. And then, in 1563, the walls moved inward. Tilde 70%. Now run the 2 years. Tilde 86%. Central paradox mechanics. Paradox stated in Hook. Most essential material. Least welcome man. Forbidden to finish his own product. Mechanism withheld until tilde 46%. The pipeline multiplier reveal. 1 batch a week out requires 52 batches in the ground. Long loop. The walls of that slot are not yours to move. Planted at tilde 18%. Closed at tilde 70% with the leather act. Darkness ladder, in order. Smell, dung, and urine as purchased inputs banished outside the walls. A year of capital buried before first revenue. Fraud is undetectable at point of sale. The state confesses this via searchers and seals. Parliament legislates the clock itself. The tanner is legally barred from the margin of his own product. The 14-month forecast in a plague economy. Structural echo with the watermill video. Both end on, the machine was never the product. The mill sold a legal right. The tannery sold time. If publishing both, the money primer here is deliberately shortened to 2 sentences so returning viewers don't hear the same lecture twice. No CTA. Ends on the inversion. If a subscribe line is wanted, place it after the final sentence, never before. Sources behind the load-bearing claims. 12-month oak bark tanning from Heritage Crafts UK. The craft is still practiced. Process stages. Dung baiting up to 3 months. And horn cores as archaeological tannery markers from standard accounts of medieval tanning. Trade separation. The 1509 sheepskin statute. And searchers and sealers from Semple, the tanners of Wrotham Manor. Archaeologia Cantiana. The Leather Act of 1563 provisions from the Worshipful Company of Couriers History. Time-based statutory rules. Lime soaked out, thoroughly dry. From the Virginia leather statute tradition, derived from the English Acts. Urban banishment, stench ordinances, and covered pits from Jorgensen's work on medieval urban sanitation. Wage and price anchors from Dyer, standards of living in the later Middle Ages. One honest caveat. Tanner's social standing varied more than the pariah image suggests. Some were wealthy guildsmen and town councilors, and the script says so in 1 sentence to stay defensible, while keeping the structural point that the trade was spatially segregated by ordinance, which is thoroughly documented.